Thanks so much, Cornelia, and good afternoon, friends and colleagues, SAT staff members, and some of our students who join us. It's always a pleasure to share a few thoughts about what's happening, at least on the SATs and other horizons, and at the end of the year, and as we do that, to look forward to the year ahead. Now, I haven't been in Big Blue Button for a while, so give me a sec while I figure out how do I share an external screen. I need to do that in a moment.
If you go down to the plus sign to the left, Kevin, that says actions, you should be able to share a screen. It's the blue button with a plus, or it might look a little different on
that. It's got propagate layout, layout settings modal, select random user, share external video. That doesn't feel right, but maybe that, no, that's a URL based thing.
Dr. Smith, under your publication, or at least your presentation, you should have three buttons. The one, it's far right.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Michelle. Yes, that works perfectly, and we are then set. Wonderful. Thank you for the tech help and the tech glitch, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to take a moment just to commend Cornelia and the Symposium team for facilitating these conversations all year round. They put an amazing amount of work in. It's a team effort, and we are grateful for the work that's done and the opportunity it presents to think deeply about theology and different aspects of our service to the church. What I want to share on today is some of the implications of this new storm around generative AI. So GAI is standing for generative AI, or generative artificial intelligence, and particularly what are known as large language models. We'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. So we're an online theological education institution, and because we're online, we've generally been an institution that prides ourselves on being on not quite the bleeding edge, but not too far from it, of whatever's happening in terms of technology that can help us to serve students and facilitate theological training more effectively. And over the last probably 25 years, I've been at SATS 20 years, but probably over the last 25 years, the reality for us has been that tech developments have generally been beneficial to SATS. They've been advantageous, and each new innovation, each new step has enabled us to do what we do better, more effectively, etc. But it's arguable that the first hugely disruptive and threatening tech development to an online theological seminary is precisely this emergence of generative AI. So perhaps for the first time in our history, a major technological development threatens to be at least as dangerous as it is helpful to the core business of theological education that's facilitated online. Now, large language modules, what are they? Essentially, it is a piece of technology that is programmed with an incredibly huge database of knowledge. Essentially, everything that you can imagine is part of its training base. And then out of that database of knowledge, which can extend in some cases to being real-time engagement with online sources, the machine is able to interact with you in very human ways. It's able to answer questions in ordinary English language that sounds distinctly human and mimics what humans do. So you can have a conversation with it of sorts, you can have an exchange, you can use it to do research, to write things, etc. And unless you've been living as a bit of a monk for the last 9 or 10 months, I assume you've heard of this. The most famous one is ChatGPT. So that's kind of GPT. That's kind of the company that initiated, or the piece of technology that initiated it, and it has started a huge revolution. So much so that I've envisaged this being probably the number one short-term priority for SATS over the next year or two, to figure out how we respond to it. So what I want to do in this time of sharing is really two things. Firstly, I want to look at what is this? I mean, what kind of things can we do with it? We're going to look a little bit at the power of generative AI, even for the kinds of things that we do as theologians, as pastors, as ministers of the gospel, as scholars. And so a little bit into that, I assume that as a group, we're probably on a broad spectrum of how familiar you are with this. For some, I know you know it inside out. There are people in the audience who know it much better than I do. I don't claim to be an expert. But there are some who may have heard of ChatGPT but never really seen it in action. So we're going to do a few real-time experiments and hope they don't go horribly wrong. And then, having looked at the power of the technology, I want to reflect on its implications for theological education, for theology and education, but the angle through which we are primarily looking at it is, what are its implications for theological training? And it's not hard to extrapolate those into real-life ministry contexts. So with that in mind, let's begin by looking at the power of generative AI. In other words, what can it do and what can we do with it? Now, this is a huge field, so all we're going to do is scratch the surface. And for this, I need to try and share a screen. So let's see if this works. Michelle, if you would just confirm for me when the screen share is working and visible to the audience.
All visible this side?
Okay, 100%. It's probably possible to resize it if it comes through small. It started small on my screen. Don't know if that's because it's my screen, but so this is ChatGPT. It's ChatGPT 4. And what you're able to do with it is ask it questions, ask it to do things for you, and it will then generate, well, this one will generate text that also has functions to generate images and stuff like that. So let's imagine that a member of our church, we'll call her Judy, has just lost her husband, John. And we want to write a condolence message, perhaps an email, to express John's been suffering from a prolonged struggle with cancer and he's recently passed away. So I would type, I've pre-copied it so that I could save a bit of time, but I would simply type, a member of my church, Judy, has just lost her husband, John, after a protracted struggle. It would have probably found that out, no problem. As a pastor, I want to send a condolence message. So we type it in and we ask it for help. And so what it's going to do is generate an example response. So, dear Judy, deeply sad John's passing. The courage and faith that you've both shown, displayed through his struggle with cancer, have been a profound testimony to many of us. During this time of grief, reminded of the words of 2 Corinthians 1:3-4, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, etc. May you experience the Father's compassion and comfort in abundance during this time. Please know that you are not alone. Our church family is here for you, ready to support you in any way that we can. If there's anything specific you need, etc. Now, that's not bad at all. So one thing you can do with ChatGPT is get it to help you to find editing for emails, for documents, for just about anything that you're trying to write. And then you copy that. If you weren't happy with it, you can ask it to regenerate it and it'll try again, and so on. All right, let's try something slightly different. Another thing you could get it to do for you is write an essay. So I'm going to paste here an assignment instruction, and I'm going to tell it a little bit about who I am and what I'm doing. So having pasted it there, let's tell it, as part of my Bachelor of Theology degree, I am taking a course about the history of Christian worship. The attachment contains the instructions for a small assignment I need to write. Please please write a 750-word essay as an example assignment. Please include 2 or 3 relevant scriptures. Keep the tone and style semi-formal, etc. Let's see what she comes up with. So there is the assignment. It's about the synagogue in early Christian worship. And if we watch the machine, it will now fairly instantly generate a sample assignment based on the task given. And usually we'll do this quite credibly. It won't put citations and references to scholarly sources in the citation, in the document, but it would probably give you a mostly accurate, pretty convincing, well-compiled first draft attempt at an assignment like that, and is better than the average student and improving rapidly. So if you haven't seen this in action, that assignment is one SATs used to have years ago in a course that we've had discontinued for many years. And we would have budgeted probably about 5 or 6 hours of time on task for a student to do some research and write that assignment. And as you can see, I won't read through it, but the answer will be pretty credible. And the machine does it in about 30 seconds. The next thing we could do, if we wanted to, would be to have a conversation with it. So let's imagine that SATS has a focus for next year on, we're going to study a bit of the life and legacy of Dr. Biancato, widely regarded as the father of evangelical Christianity in Africa. So let's imagine we want to get a bit of information, and I've pre-prepared the question, which means it's going to paste it as an image, which we don't need. But so I'm conducting a study of the life and legacy of Biancato, blah, blah, blah. Please give me a synopsis of his life. Let's see what we get. Influential figure in the development of evangelical Christianity in Africa during the 20th century, born here, etc. PhD at Southwestern Baptist Seminary. I think that's wrong. Didn't he do it at Dallas Theological? So that might be a factual error. Cato was concerned with the authenticity and purity of Christian doctrine in the African context, advocating for evangelical Christianity that was free from syncretism. That's pretty good. He was a strong proponent of biblical inerrancy and emphasized the need for theological education. Also very good. Those were distinctive influences. And a bit more information about his life. Okay, so thanks, ChatGPT, for that. Can you point me to some of the most useful books about him or resources by or about him? Let's see what it comes up with. The most important books and articles about Cato. All right, so it's now isn't doing it out of its knowledge base. It's conducting a search of the internet. That's going to take a little bit longer. So it's visiting a few websites. I need to fill space while it does that. For the next answer, I will tell it not to do a search. There we go. Let's see what we find. Okay, I ran the same experiment yesterday and got a few additional ones. This is sort of the seminal work on Cato before Dr. Iafodi's recent PhD dissertation. This is Cato's own most influential work. So it's picked up some of them, could have done better. We could ask it to keep probing. You can ask it to dig deeper, etc., and it'll keep going. And we can keep asking it more and more questions and digging deeper and deeper into that. So what you can see unfolding is a little bit of a kind of dialogue or an exchange between me and the AI as a kind of discussion partner. So let's say, how are the theological debates confronting Christians in Africa today similar or different to those in Cato's time? Now, please answer from your training without using the browser. That'll, for the rest of this conversation, that'll hopefully start doing the Bing thing. So what it's hopefully going to give me is some of the synopsis of what issues was Cato facing in his time and how are they similar and different to some of the hot potato debates in African evangelical Christianity today. And you can make up your own mind as to whether it's picking good examples of those differences: syncretism, theological education, social justice, and spiritual priorities. Differences: prosperity gospel has grown, globalization and technology is new, etc. Sexuality and gender roles, not too bad. And we could keep digging. Right, let's do one example. Let's imagine that I want to do some research about polygamy in African Christianity. So I'm going to ask it a few questions about polygamy in African Christianity, starting with, I want to research the issue of polygamy in African Christianity. It's quite a hot potato debate with some arguing for and others against. I'm going to ask you some questions if I may. So now it's going to be very friendly and tell me you're more than welcome. Please go ahead and ask your questions. Absolutely, you may ask about that. All right, there's some things it won't talk to you about. So let's ask it, with respect to Christians who support polygamy, what arguments do they make for their position? Cultural and contextual historical precedent, biblical examples from the Old Testament, social and economic stability, theological rationalization, some arguments that marriage whose primary purpose is procreation, so the rate, blah, 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 pragmatic, etc., etc. So it's identified 6 possible ways that those who support polygamy from a Christian viewpoint would try to build their case. And we could, of course, dig into all or any of those in more detail. But let's ask it, what about the other side? So what are the counter arguments by those who would oppose Christianity? Biblical mandate for monogamy, New Testament teaching, moral and ethical considerations. Where's that going? Ethical arguments include concerns about the equality and dignity of women, practical concerns, societal order and witness. And we, again, could work through these in some detail. And I can just keep asking more and more probing questions and continuing a kind of exchange or a dialogue in which the machine is acting as a conversation partner, but is drawing on a fairly large, and by fairly large, I mean even larger than Bill Domeris's knowledge base. Let's try 1 or 2 more. Yeah, so let's tell it, for an assignment, I need to please write a 750-word essay making the case for polygamy being approved amongst African Christians. Give it a second, and maybe we can pick out one more. Okay, languishing just a fraction. It's a little slower, but hopefully it won't. Every now and again it'll crash. This one will, but you kind of get the idea of the speed. Okay, that's languishing a little bit. I'll let it run in on, and we can begin to move on. So if you haven't seen this thing in operation, it's rather mind-blowing. I'll remember the first time I saw it from something had come across. It was an earlier generation of the same tool, and he had put a little proof together, and my eyes were out on stalks that this could be done so quickly and effectively and fairly accurately. Now, it's means flawless. It makes a fair number of mistakes, but it's generally pretty good. It writes in perfect English. There won't be typos or any of the kinds of errors that we make humanly. And if you coach it correctly, it will even give you answers that align with your nature, etc. So I have put into, if I go to the bottom here, under custom instructions, you can train it as to who you are, what you do, what your perspectives are. So I've given it some background about myself, and it'll generally now create responses that align with its coaching about my own orientations, interests, etc. All right, so that took a little bit longer, but we have a 750 word, give or take, essay. Did it tell us how many words? Didn't tell us. So that is scratching the surface of a fairly disruptive and world-changing piece of technology. Let me exit that. So what kinds of things can it do? Well, just about any writing and research kind of thing. So it can write professional communications like emails, it can write assignments, it can engage in exploratory discussions, it can help with different stages of research. Oh, one more thing I forgot to show. Let me share it again. Also particularly good at summarizing documents. So I'm on ChatGPT 4 here, which is the non-free one as far as I know. So let's go and pick a document. Let's take Gerald West's manual for, what do you mean you can't upload it? That's ridiculous. I know it can upload it because it uploaded it earlier. And let's ask it to please summarize this document in 300 words. So now probably take a couple of minutes to scan the document. That's reading the document. And then it will produce what is usually a fairly good synopsis of whatever you've put into it. And that's one of its great values for research, is the ability to quickly scan and summarize the kernel of a document. Matt showed me yesterday that JSTOR now has this function integrated in a beta form, so that as you're searching for journal articles on JSTOR, you can ask the AI to. So there we've got a 300-word summary of the resource by Gerald West that I uploaded, and we're not going to read through it. Okay, let's turn that off. So it can analyze and summarize a source fairly quickly as well. I'm guessing if you haven't seen it, it's fairly mind-blowing. If you have seen it and you knew what it can do, it's still pretty mind-blowing. So it's a really amazing tech development. What I want to do now is reflect a little bit on some of the implications. So some of the potential and pitfalls, and often they go together. Something is simultaneously a potential and a problem or a challenge, all rolled into one. So let me start with a personal stance. I'll tell you where I land on the attitude toward that kind of thing. In terms of my own stance on generative AI, I believe it's technology that fundamentally changes the world. It fundamentally is going to change education and many dimensions of life. And we cannot go back to the world that existed before. Talking about 2022. We can't ever go back to the world that existed before it. we need to become both skillful and ethical users of this tool, and we need to teach our students how to be skillful and ethical users at the same time. There's no point fighting it or banning it. It's here to stay. If we don't adapt, we will become obsolete, and we'll become obsolete in a hurry. So whether we would prefer to live in a pre-generative AI world or a post-generative AI world is completely irrelevant. We now live in a world with GAI, and we need to figure out what that means and how it fundamentally changes our lives, and we need to become both skillful and ethical users of the new technology. So I want to look at its implications in 5 academic areas: writing, implications for pedagogy, some implications around plagiarism, implications for assessment, so that's squarely in the education and theological education sector, and then implications for what it means to be an academic in a new and changing reality. So we're going to pick on those 5 issues in sequence, starting with implications for writing. The first one is scary if you're a theological educator. It's that for learning and assessment, writing is dead. As a tool for learning, meaning students learning theology, and for assessing that they've learned, writing, and yeah, I'm talking about writing assignments, writing essays, and forum posts and that type of thing is dead. We will no longer be able to assess people on the basis of their writing skill, because everyone will be able to produce a good quality essay without needing to know anything or have any skills. All they have to do is log on to the generative AI site, type in the instructions, it will spit out an essay. They probably need to add some references and citations and so on, but we will no longer be able to judge from that which is produced and submitted if the person is competent to produce and submit something. We will also no longer be able to use the writing of essays or sermons or similar products as a learning task. Well, we will to some extent, but there's a huge limitation on it. And that limitation is that everyone will be able to produce a good product without necessarily going through the process of the learning that's involved in producing that product. So writing as a foundational mechanism for people learning, and then for the educator to assess whether and what they've learned, is terminally ill. It'll be dead very, very soon. Particularly simple, short, factual writing tasks are pointless as academic exercises in this new world. There may be some value in having people explore these questions like, what was the role of the synagogue, or, tell me about the life and legacy of Biancato, or what are the pros and cons or the cases for and against polygamy amongst Christians, and that sort of thing. Their value may be in asking people to explore those questions, but asking them to write and submit a product of that exploration that is a short essay or something similar will be of limited value. We simply won't know whether they learned anything, whether what we are reading is their work or the machine's. For scholarship, writing remains critical. So what the AI can do is it can grind through an inordinate amount of data in seconds. It can summarize, it can synthesize, it can represent information that it already has in its knowledge base or that it derives from the internet in response to your prompt. But it can't think, and it can't think new thoughts. It can't generate new knowledge or new ideas. That remains the domain of the scholar. And a key means of doing that is through writing. So for scholarship, writing will remain important, but there's a fundamental problem. the way people learn to write well is scaffolded. It means it's a skill that's gradually developed. So you start as a high school kid and you start writing some basic things, then you become a bachelor's student and you gradually learn writing skills so that eventually when you're a PhD candidate, you should have acquired those skills. But if writing is dead in the foundational levels of our education, how are we going to develop people who can do scholarly work? I don't have an answer to that. We will still need the high level thinking that the machine can't do for us. How we get to it is a big head scratch. What does the future hold for writers and writing? I think writers will become redactors. To redact means to sift through sources and edit them, fine-tune them, refine them, help them to work together. A lot of writing will become redaction. And the most effective people at it will be those who can expertly use the AI technology along with other scholarly sources and materials to produce something that is the product. It's their product, even though not every word is a word that they wrote themselves. Competence in this world will depend on one's ability to be a master of the massive material that you source from the GAI and from other sources as well. Most works are going to be written with the aid of GAIs in the future. So most books, most articles, in some sense, is going to be a collaborative undertaking by the author and the machine. And we're going to be talking about a continuum along which that happens. Now, we might protest that, if you've used GAI to help produce a blog post or a journal article or a book, that is not your own work. And I think there's there's a lot of thinking to be done in terms of the ethical dimensions of this whole thing. But let me use Excel for a moment, just as a familiar illustration. If you lived in the 1940s, you might object that someone who produced a complex budget using Excel, we had a board meeting last night and Doug is a genius on Excel. So we have these Excel spreadsheets with 40 zillion tabs and a million fields all cross-connected. It's quite impressive. But for the purists, they might, complain that that's not really Doug's work because Excel did all the work for him. He didn't add all the numbers together and cross-tabulate all the cells, etc. The human expertise now lies in knowing how to use the tool to produce something exceptional. And maybe we're headed in the same space with respect, or in the same direction with respect to written products. So massive, massive question mark hanging over this thing, which is so core to our theological history and enterprise. All right, a little bit about pedagogy, so teaching methods. And I'm biasedly interested in online theological education. So I'm particularly interested in what are the implications for online theological education. So the rise of generative AI is going to fundamentally change the learning theory known as social constructivism as a philosophy of learning. What is social constructivism? Well, constructivism is the idea that we learn by actively constructing our understanding of things and the world through the various experiences that we have. Attending a lecture, reading a book could be experiences, but so could any other everyday experience. So you learn by constructing your understanding of things, internally piecing it together and coming to beliefs, understandings, convictions, etc. It's an internal process of making sense of things. And it's probably the most influential learning theory around for the last 30 or 40 years. Social constructivism basically just adds the social emphasis to that this process of constructing our understanding, constructing our sense and making sense of the world and concepts and so on, doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in some kind of learning community where we are mutually stimulated, etc., as we interact with others. And we could add here that research is a particular kind of constructivism, because when you research, you are analyzing a whole bunch of source materials, etc., but ultimately the learning comes through the intense process of analyzing, thinking through, and then synthesizing a product that represents your understanding of it. So your article or your thesis is the product of a constructivist process. Okay, so my claim is that GAI is going to fundamentally change social constructivism as a learning theory. And I think it's going to impact both elements, both the social and the construction aspects. On the social aspect, the machine, like ChatGPT, will become a kind of discussion partner. Probably already is. I already use ChatGPT as a discussion partner, along with human discussion partners, but it's a discussion partner. And the interactive process of framing our understanding of concepts, topics, etc., will include a process of having a kind of conversation with the machine, asking it questions, getting responses, etc. So I see I'm doing badly on time. Cornelia, tell me what my timeline is here.
Kevin, you can take all the time you need. We've got until 3:30, so the longer you talk, the less time we'll have for Q&A, but you're still doing fine. Maybe if you can wrap up in about 15 minutes, we'll have 20 minutes for Q&A.
Right, and if I don't have any answers, I should keep going until 3:30. Is that more or less how I should think about this?
Correct.
Okay. All right, wonderful. So the construction aspect will also change, because almost everything we produce is, at the end of the day, once this becomes mainstream, is going to be in some sense a collaborative project, co-produced by a human author working in combination with a machine. Ethical usage will involve transparent disclosure of the process that we followed, and how and in what sense the product is my work and not just something that the GAI spat out. And there's a lot of work to be thought through in terms of the ethics. But the construction side of this is going to be, in some sense, collaborative with human and machine co-laboring in some sense. Expertise then is measured by how effectively the person used the tool, asking good questions, synthesizing things well, etc., etc. Much like the ability that Doug has to use Excel effectively. Okay. That means that SATS's, and probably not only SATS's, but certainly SATS's dominant pedagogy, which is based on a kind of constructivism, will become obsolete, probably already obsolete to those who know how to use the machine and are prepared to do it unethically. Meaning that, so SATS's basic learning approach has been that we try and encourage students to learn about a topic by assigning usually reasonably small essay type assignments. And the learning is supposed to happen because the student consults a variety of sources, tries to make sense of them. You have the sense making thing. And in the process of constructing a product, usually an essay, an assignment that reflects your understanding, that process facilitates learning. It's a mini version of doing a research project. And so that's been our dominant pedagogy, the way we ostensibly try to facilitate learning, not exclusively, but it's been our dominant pedagogy. The emergence of GAI makes the modality obsolete, because if they are willing to do it, a student can take the assignment question, stick it into the machine, add a few citations, spend 15 minutes on it, not synthesize anything, not analyze anything, not understand anything, and still produce a product that ticks the boxes as far as the essay is an essay that answers the question that was posed. That's not the goal at all, of course. But we face this as a significant threat. And so the reality is everyone will be able to produce a polished and professional looking essay. Every essay will be grammatically correct, will have a thesis statement, will have main points, will have a fitting introduction and conclusion. And all of these mechanical, easy to identify things that have traditionally distinguished competence from incompetence in our education framework are suddenly irrelevant, or going to be irrelevant. Competence and learning will reside in nuance, the nuance and the process of harnessing this information that I have at my fingertips and being able to create something that is still in some meaningful sense my own framed and constructed understanding of the topic. Assessing that will be quite difficult, but that's what we have to figure out how to do. Right, implications for assessment. We might not get through all 5 to leave space for timing, but anyhow, implications for assessment. The implications for assessment are huge. Where did I put assessment? Hidden it somewhere. Did I miss one? No. 8, 9. No, implications for assessment. Okay, got them different orders in 2 documents. So think about this. A product will be worthless as an indicator of competence. The ability to hand in an essay that convincingly argues for or against polygamy amongst African Christians, or that synthesizes the life and legacy of Biancato, or fill in your blank, analyzes the major preaching themes in 1 Chronicles 28. The ability to produce something with a certain content will be meaningless as an indicator of learning and competency on the part of the person who hands it in. In other words, if I can't interrogate you in some sense so that I can see that you've thought these things through and you've owned an understanding of them and you've brought different resources into conversation with one another, if I don't have a mechanism to do that, it will be impossible for me to assess whether you're competent or not, purely on the basis of the product that you hand in. At the most extreme level of our education, a product is a PhD dissertation. For the stock in trade stuff, it's a small-scale assignment on a particular topic. So that poses an enormous threat to our education system. In the past, there were only 2 ways to produce a product. Either you wrote it yourself and it accurately reflected your understanding and skill, or you plagiarized it, in which case it was stolen from somebody else, and because the thing you stole it from exists in the real world, there's a reasonable chance that you'd get caught doing that. So that's all changed. And you can now produce something without needing to understand anything. I think that means that our traditional assignments and discussion forums, where what is submitted is taken as an indication of the student's ability to synthesize material and express their understanding of a topic in writing, all of those things have suddenly got a gigantic question mark over their value as learning and assessment tools. Traditional assignments, I think, are going to be replaced by redacted and curated content. So your task as a learner is to collect a portfolio of evidence that includes the products you produce, but also includes things that demonstrate how you've done that and how you've grappled with putting this all together. So massive changes there. And then students will need to be assessed on the mastery of the process and nuance, not on the quality of the product, because anyone can now produce a good end product. You can produce a good end product on most questions that would be posed to you without even needing to read what you've produced. And if anyone can produce a good end product, then what we assess to measure competence is going to have to be process, mastery, integration of the content, etc. And that raises huge questions about how we do assessment in future theological education. Some quick implications. Graded assignments and forums, I think those become a no, because they're close to, if not completely worthless, as indicators of learning in a GAI world, once everybody cottons on that this technology is available. I think it's a yes to portfolios of evidence, to lots of module quizzes, short quizzes that are more difficult to cheat on with time limits, etc. That we're going to have to backload assessment in the form of invigilated examinations, where we can test the understanding in hopefully in an environment where your dependence on the technology to produce the product is severely controlled and restricted. And perhaps oral examinations become a staple part of our assessment mix. So if you can produce a portfolio of evidence and I can have a 15-minute conversation with you where you talk me through how you got to that end product, I should be able to assess whether or not you've learned anything, understood it, and cultivated skills through the process. Used to be possible to make the assumption that the quality of the end product you produced was evidence of that, but it will no longer be possible to make that assumption. So huge implications for how we assess learning. If you're a physical residential space, you can still do assessment in a real-time, somewhat controlled environment. It's more difficult in a decentralized online space. Did I miss? Oh, I just missed a slide. All right, so plagiarism is another heading that I wanted to talk about briefly, and then maybe a few thoughts about what it means for future academics. But plagiarism essentially is passing off someone else's ideas or words as if they were your own. And we can detect plagiarism by comparing the forgery to the original. And the reason it's bad is because you are stealing someone else's honor and appropriating it to yourself. You're stealing the credit that belongs to them for their thoughts and ideas and passing those thoughts and ideas off as your own. Now, AI-generated text differs in two significant ways. Firstly, at least with current technology, it's difficult to detect. And even where detection algorithms will flag something as probably generated by AI, there's no 100% certain way of making a diagnosis currently. Now, we may find ourselves in a situation analogous to DNA testing and even what they do with some of the Olympic athlete testing, where urine samples can be kept on record for years. And so things that were not detectable when someone cheated may be detectable in the future, in which case one can imagine we're going to have no shortage of humiliated academics who published stuff dishonestly without disclosing how and to what extent they made use of this kind of technology. But right now, the tools for detection are hopelessly inadequate and far from foolproof. The other thing to bear in mind is the machine is not a person. So if I'm taking ideas from a machine and passing them off as my own, and I was in some sense co-generating them, where's the ethical boundary between what's my work, what's my thinking, what's theirs, what I'm lots of ethical questions to think through in this area. Right now, I would argue that it should be ethical to use GAI tools provided we are transparent in disclosing that and how we use them, and that the end product is in some meaningful sense our own. But again, we're in the embryonic stage of thinking through most of these things, and I'm happy for that tentative early assumption to be challenged. Right, what does it mean for academics and lecturers? One of the things I think it means is that future lecturers are going to need to be SMEs, subject matter experts, with an ability to conduct things like oral examinations and other assessments that get beneath the surface of what was presented, to really probe whether the person presenting it understands the subject matter. I think that's going to call for a much higher level of expertise. Our assessment tasks will in the future no longer be able to be static. In other words, you won't be able to have 100 students writing the same essay. That type of thing is pointless. So they're going to be more dynamic projects that grow out of exploration of a subject area, and therefore to assess them meaningfully would require someone who is at a high level of command of their subject area. Since summative assessment, that's deciding whether someone passes or fails and whether they get 50 or 90%, is probably going to need to be backloaded, meaning it all comes at the end of the course. The way SATS does it currently is it sort of is all the way through the course with the final thing being at the end. And that raises questions about what the role of a lecturer would be during an online course. What do you, if the main assessment is backloaded, what are we doing while the course is running? And then a few other thoughts that I will skip over for now. All right, so GAI, a huge game changer in the land of academia. We currently have far more questions than we have answers. I want to suggest that we're not afraid, and we shouldn't be afraid of GAI. Jesus will build his church. The amazing thing about the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ is that it is versatile. Christianity can flourish and prosper in any culture, in any context. It's not wrapped in external formalities that make it constraining in that sense, and the Lord will continue to build his church. Technologies may change how you do that and how training works, but I don't think we should be afraid of it. The Lord will build his church, and the gates of technological development will not prevail against it. Now, in many ways, the new world brings opportunities. And I think there are many positive opportunities that emerge here. For instance, it levels the playing field. Because a single entity is programmed with such a vast body of knowledge, suddenly everyone who has access to that has access to ostensibly the entire knowledge base of the internet and is able to gain that relatively freely. So that's quite a game changer. I think the notion that we could all have a discussion partner, a very knowledgeable discussion partner, and that if I'm trying to understand something, I can throw questions, get a response, throw another question, get another response. That is often how we learn in real life. And even for those studying alone, we no longer need to be quite so alone. Okay, it's not a human partner, but it's a conversation partner. If you were disadvantaged because of English competency in producing written products, a lot of that disadvantage is almost instantly overcome, and so on. So there's a new world that brings many positive opportunities as well as many challenges that we need to think through. The last statement I'll make is that the old world is gone. The academic and educational and theological world of 2022 is gone, probably forever. We're living in a new world, and we must adapt or die. Those who don't adapt will quickly become obsolete. The surest way to die is to prohibit the use of GAI. It's our first instinct when something like this hits. Oh, how are we going to control for plagiarism? We need to prohibit the use of it in its entirety. I think the surest way to become obsolete is to prohibit the use of such technology, trying in vain to live in a yester world. The yester world is gone. Whether we like it or not, this is the world that we now live in. And as SATS, we're not going to do that. We will learn to function and flourish in the new reality. We will learn to teach ourselves and our students what skillful and ethical use of these new technologies ought to look like for the glory of God and for the good of others. Thank you so much. I'll pass the mic back to the chair, and Cornelia, you are welcome to facilitate questions. I don't claim to have answers, but you're welcome to ask the questions.